Hey everybody, it's Mitch Axelrod, Beatletunes author and co-host of the Fab for Free for All podcast. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about these things in back of me. The frames you see of the Beatles US 45s and picture sleeves, except those aren't the picture sleeves that were released with the 45s. And I'll get into that in this video. But remember, if you like these types of videos or you like our podcast, Fab for Free for All, please subscribe to the Fab for Free for All channel on YouTube. There'll be a button here and just click on it and subscribe, because we're all going to be, each one of the co-hosts, Tony Triguardo, Rob Leonard, and myself, will be making content like this besides doing the podcast for you. So subscribe, like, and subscribe. Anyway, picture sleeves. So in general, I love picture sleeves. I don't know why. I guess a lot of people do. Picture sleeves, for those who don't know, came with the record, when a 45. When you went into your local record store. Again, I'm 61 years old, so I remember going into a record store and buying 45s and hoping there was a picture sleeve. And quite frankly, depending on how your local record store displayed the 45s and sold them is going to depend on how your memory of them is. Now, my memory is going to mostly a store called TSS in New York, Times Square store, and getting these 45s. Now, Times Square, I also went to Record World and as I got older, but when I was younger in the 60s, I was taken by my dad to Times Square store because his friend Bernie used to own the record shop in Times Square store, because it was an independent dealer within the department store. So anyway, TSS used to have a wall of picture sleeves. It was slots, top 40 and top 100. Now, my memory is top 100 and TSS. Some stores only had the top 40. And what you'd see is a big wall where the 45, you'd see, again, 100 slots, and in each slot would be that week's top 100, number one in this slot too, you know what I mean? And it would say under it, number one, the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Number two, whatever, Venus, whoever. But what I used to love was going in and seeing all the slots. And inside each slot, you'd see like a little stack of records, but you couldn't see whether it had a picture sleeve or not. And then you'd go put your hand in, and hopefully you came out with a really cool picture sleeve. Now, I just love them, again, because you got to see, not only the Beatles, but you got to see all of your favorite bands back then with a picture sleeve. You got to see what they looked like and what they were up to and what they looked like at that moment, which wasn't always correct, which we'll get into a little bit too. But most of the time, they were a good representation of the band at the time. Now, with the Beatles, there were picture sleeves for most all of their 45s. On the East Coast, in the United States, there was a picture sleeve for Can't Buy Me Love, which it's rare, and most people know it's rare. Some people don't know why, so I'm going to tell you why. It's rare because they had advanced sales of over 2 million copies. So why go ahead and pay the cost of printing more picture sleeves when the record is selling itself? Which you can understand with the Beatles. Can't Buy Me Love was a huge hit, I believe in March of 64. So there was a picture sleeve, but it's a rare one. Later on, when they were moving towards Apple, some of the later ones didn't have, some of the later 45s in the US did not have a picture sleeve. In the UK, you guys didn't even know about the picture sleeves until like 67, at least for the Beatles, where I believe Penny Lane and Back with Strawberry Fields was the first picture sleeve issued. And then there were a whole series of picture sleeves done for later reissues and stuff, which was really kind of cool too. And I like those UK sleeves as well. But this video is focusing on the US sleeve, okay? US sleeves. So you can see back there, why did I put these weird looking sleeves with the original 45s? And yes, in those frames, those cheap frames, and I'll explain how I did everything. In those cheap frames are the original 45s. All right. Now, again, the sleeves are what's called fantasy sleeves because I wanted to display the Beatles somehow in my house. I am in the basement, and unfortunately, I've taken up enough room upstairs where now I've been thrown downstairs. Many of you have been, so I think you all know what position I'm in here. But I wanted to display the Beatles somehow to make the basement feel a little more homey in terms of, because I work down here, in terms of making myself feel comfortable. And I love being around the Beatles. I have a brand new audio set up with turntable and stuff, so I just wanted to feel comfortable. So I figured, how can I possibly do something with the Beatles picture sleeves without ruining the original sleeves? I didn't want to start putting in the sleeves in frames and taping them or not taping them, and I just didn't want to do that, risk them getting faded and in sunlight, because we do have some windows down here. So I just didn't want to risk all that. So what I did was I went on Amazon. Actually, first I started off on an auction site. It rhymes with today, or today. And I saw that a lot of people were making these fantasy sleeves. And what it was is that they took the original sleeve, they mimicked the fonts and everything. You can see like where it says the Beatles and all that, A Hard Day's Night up here. So they took that and meticulously copied the fonts, but just put different pictures. A lot of the times what they did was they put pictures that were much more appropriate for the song being released. Not always, because I don't have a lot of them. I have 12 of them up, which we'll talk about each one. But the ones that I don't have up are ones that I found either the sleeve that was made as a fantasy sleeve was not anything great, or it just wasn't so different from the original, where I had to buy it and make a do-it-yourself frame like you see behind me. But I did on some of them, and we'll get to them. But if you want to know how I did all of these, please drop me a comment. I'll put links to all of the suppliers if you want to make these frames by yourself. And I think they look really cool up all together. And this video is going to go into each single one of the 12 frames that I have and explain and show you the original sleeve, and tell about what the sleeve was all about in terms of where it was taken, what it's a photo from or photos from, and then show you the fantasy sleeves, which are behind me, and tell you all the details of those. And some of them are pretty fascinating in terms of the fantasy and also the original sleeves. I know for a fact I had to do a lot of research to find out more about, like picture sleeve for Yellow Submarine back with Eleanor Rigby, where that original was taken. And you'll hear that in a little bit. So how much did all this stuff cost? It really wasn't that bad. Each frame cost me probably between $25 and $35. And I'll explain why, because the frames themselves, again, they're pretty cheap. It's just a plexiglass. It's not a glass, so these are not going to be protected and all that and from the sun, but it's okay. The frames were less than $5 each on Amazon, so they're really cool. And you can get different color ones, and people have been taking my advice because I've shown them on our Fab4 free-for-all page, and people have been buying different color matting, different color frames, so it's kind of cool. And all, again, $5 and under, not bad. The picture sleeves themselves go for about $10. That's the least I found them. So right there, that's 15. The matting I had to buy at Etsy, and you could see it's got gold rim around with the white matting, specially cut. So they're $10 each on Etsy. Someone makes them. They're really great quality, beautifully done. And you can get any color you want if you want the gold around, if you wanted black, if you're buying a black frame. So again, search I'll give the link. You can search that person or Etsy in general and get what you want. And then lastly is the record. So the record, again, the mat was $10. So that's, 5 for the frame, 10 and 10. So that's 25 right there. Now the record, I've gotten some of them for 99 cents on auction sites. It's amazing, and selling sites, and they're beautiful. Or I found a few in record stores that were in piles of just junk, and they're beautiful. Now I look for a record that the label has to be great. If the label's not great, it's not going to display well. So that's just personal. I need it to look great. If I wanted to look authentic, I would show you my first I Want to Hold Your Hand when I was 2, and I played the crap out of it. You could see that it would be historically great looking, but not great displayability. Yeah. Anyway, so the records, if they have a great label, I don't really care about the vinyl as much. The vinyl, I've been very lucky when I found a great label. The vinyl's always been great. The most I've paid for a record is $10. So there's 35. I've paid 99 cents. So that's why I say these frames are $25 to $35, depending on how you find the record. That's the big deal. And you could find so many of these records so cheap if you just go on auction sites or any selling sites. I've even gotten some on Macari for $1 each because people just list Beatles singles, but you do have to really zoom in on the labels. Don't listen to descriptions because I've gotten burned. But each one of these frames, none of these frames has cost me any more than $35. And you know what? They take 5 minutes to put together, and they look super. Now I've taped personally. I use acid-free tape. You can buy it in any art store, but you can use any tape you want with these if you don't mind the picture sleeve possibly being ruined whenever you do take these apart. Not that I would ever take these apart because I have these 45s already in my collection, so there's no issue with me keeping them the way they are. So the picture sleeves, to me, again, they're brand new. I could always buy another one if they get ripped or whatever. So I'm going to just say I would just use regular tape, but acid-free if you want to try to preserve them for any reason. The other issue is that some of these fantastic fantasy sleeves have a B-side, meaning a different picture on the B-side. And as I explained in the rest of this video, some of them were so tough because I really I had to decide what's the criteria for these frames, as if there's a criteria. It's just my own personal criteria. So what I did was I said, you know what, I'm going to use the A side of the Beatles singles because, again, some of these, which I'll show you, the Beatles Get Back, which is a beautiful, right here. You can't see it, my finger. Yeah. And also over here, this one with Hello Goodbye, which you'll see all these up close in depth, had fantastic pictures on the back. And I'm so torn about maybe whether to break my own criteria and buy another single and another sleeve and make a different frame with the B-side, because especially those two that I mentioned have incredible pictures on the back. And I'm like, oh, he did such a, or she did, whomever did the fantasy sleeve, did such a good job that I may just have to sneak in a B-side frame or 2 or 3 or 4, but don't tell my wife. Anyway, that's the story really on these. So you'll get a little bit of an education. I hope you really enjoy these because I do. They're just different, they're so, these sleeves are made obviously much different than the ones in the 60s. These are a heavier construction. So if you want to put your regular 45s, you don't want to put them in frames. You just want to buy them and put them with your 45s to have a cool collection, like an alternate collection. That's good too. And again, if you want any links at all, just drop me a comment. Hopefully I'll remember to put the links in the initial description, and we'll go from there. So I think that's all I need to say before we get into each one. So I really do hope you enjoy this. Again, like and subscribe to Fab Four Free for All's YouTube channel and enjoy. Now, as I've spoken about in the intro, these things just display beautifully. I mean, you can see all these beautiful, they just look really good. And if anybody needs tips on how to hang things without actual hangers where you have to measure and everything, just ask me in the comments. I'll let you know. There's a certain tape that I use that supposedly, hopefully, doesn't ruin the walls. But these are really cool. So let's start with I Want to Hold Your Hand. And again, these are all US picture sleeves and obviously fantasy versions of the US picture sleeves and singles. So there's the fantasy. Let's look at the original. The original picture sleeve is a picture taken by Dejo Hoffman, and it was done in early spring of '63 at his Water Street studio. Beautiful picture, classic picture. You know, it's a beautiful sleeve. I love the black and white. The new one, or the fantasy, uses the same exact font as the original, except the ink now is in brown, or whatever the color that is, because the color picture is being used. So they used the black ink with the black and white, and the fantasy people used color to match the color picture. Now the color picture here is a Robert Freeman picture that was taken on August 22nd, 1963 at the Palace Court Hotel in Bournemouth, England. Now this obviously was more like the Meet the Beatles US album cover, obviously in a different configuration because Ringo is pretty much even with the rest. But you can see it's a beautiful picture. I just like it. The other one is perfectly good and classic. This one just reminds me more of the album Meet the Beatles because I Want to Hold Your Hand is on the album Meet the Beatles. So that's that. Let's go on to the Hard Day's Night. So this is the Hard Day's Night fantasy sleeve. Let's take a look at the original sleeve and notice the font, even the little two things at the end of the Beatles. He's put them there, which is kind of cool. Now this sleeve is a composite of live performances from the Ed Sullivan Show, and Ringo is from the Washington Coliseum show. Obviously they were going to film Hard Day's Night, I believe starting in March, if I'm not mistaken. So these pictures are a little prior, and I know Capitol had to plan prior to putting out the singles, so they couldn't have contemporary shots. But that's what the fantasy sleeves are for. But I like this one, the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, and I should have known better if you haven't seen it, obviously. But the fantasy sleeve was taken from composite shots from the UK album cover. So it's much more appropriate. And some of these shots were not on the cover, you can see. Some of them are unreleased shots that were not used. So this fantasy sleeve, to me, is just a little more appropriate than the one that Capitol originally used. It's beautiful, and I really like it a lot. It was also used, some of these pictures were used on the back of the United Artists Hard Day's Night album. Let's move on, shall we? Here's the fantasy picture sleeve for We Can Work It Out. Obviously a beautiful picture, but let's look at the original. And again, same fonts, I really love it. This is a beautiful picture of the Beatles, but it was taken in October of 1964 in Hyde Park. Great picture. This obviously adorned the Beatles for Sale album in the UK, but it was taken October 24th, 1964. Very outdated for when We Can Work It Out was released. This picture, obviously, is another Robert Freeman photo, which the other one was, but Robert Freeman took this one during obviously for the Rubber Soul album cover, Unstretched, and it's much more appropriate considering that We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper were recorded during the same sessions for Rubber Soul. Beautiful. Both beautiful pictures, but the original release sleeve was way outdated in terms of photo for this single. Let's move on. And I apologize for all the moving and everything. I'm in a stuck space, so it's kind of weird. I can't put it on a tripod. But here is the Paperback Writer Rain Fantasy sleeve. Let's look at the original. Again, beautifully mimicked. Here's the original. Paperback Writer Rain. You can see gorgeous photos of the Beatles playing live, probably 1965, based on their look. But if you look, George and John are playing left-handed. I guess they needed that to arrange them to maybe John to face Paul, but nice, but it's okay. The fantasy sleeve is actually, sorry about my finger there. The fantasy sleeve was taken May 20th, 1966 at Chiswick House when they were actually filming the promo film for Paperback Writer. So again, this is very, very appropriate. And again, I'll repeat it a lot that I know Capitol had to put together the mock-ups for everything early, so they couldn't take exact photos from the time, but the fantasy people could because it's obviously in hindsight. So this is a beautiful photo from one of the Paperback Writer promos. Just a lovely photo. Really looks good with everything. Beautiful color. Nicely done by the fantasy people. Okay, moving on. The next U.S. Capitol picture sleeve is for Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields. Here's the fantasy picture. Here's the regular sleeve. I love this sleeve. It's probably one of my favorites. But in order to have another alternative on the wall, I bought the fantasy. Now, this was taken in February of 67 by, I'm going to mess this up, French photographer Jean-Paul Perrier. It was Jean-Marie Perrier in February of 67. Beautiful shot. I love this picture sleeve. And those of you had the Beatles at the back. Again, I can only show one side in these frames, so unfortunately. But this also is a picture by Jean-Marie Perrier in the same photo shoot. A bunch of people were there, photographers taking pictures, but I just wanted an alternative. This is gorgeous. The other one I like better, but this is a beautiful one as well. Moving on. All You Need Is Love. There is the fantasy sleeve. Let's see the original. The original obviously is 1967, so it's of the period, yay Capitol. But these pictures are of the gatefold of the Sgt. Pepper album. The fantasy sleeve is much, much more appropriate because the fantasy sleeve were taken from the actual Our World broadcast on June 25th, 1967. So it's much, much more appropriate for this picture sleeve. Again, nicely done by the fantasy people. The next sleeve I want to talk about is this one, Hello Goodbye. I love this sleeve. But let's look at the original. Hello Goodbye and I Am the Walrus. Here's the original. Another picture from the Jean-Marie Perrier from February of 67. Beautiful. I think it was used as a publicity photo from 67, the official Beatle publicity photo. You can see again, they mimicked the font and everything. Really beautiful. I love it. Now the fantasy sleeve is so much more appropriate because it's actually, as you all know, a picture from the Saville Theater of 67 when the Beatles were filming the 3 different, or however many different there were, promo clips for Hello Goodbye. So this is so appropriate. I love this photo. This sleeve, I wish it would have been the official sleeve, but obviously we know it couldn't be because they were filming it after the song was obviously done. The one thing I will say, the caveat on this is that the B-side, I Am the Walrus, the fantasy people, a lot of these sleeves, they made different B-sides, pictures. And I debated really hard on this because I Am the Walrus, the side for I Am the Walrus, which I obviously can't show you, is such a gorgeous picture from Magical Mystery Tour. And I almost made an exception and did a B-side instead of the A. And maybe in the future, because these are so cheap to make, maybe I will make a B-side frame just like this, but I'll have I Am the Walrus in there. because the I Am the Walrus side, if you can find it on your auction site, is really a gorgeous picture. But I tried to stick to the A sides, which were released. Okay. Moving on to Lady Madonna. Lady Madonna, sorry about that. Had an outage, power outage. Anyway, the Lady Madonna, another beautiful picture of the Beatles. Okay, the Lady Madonna was taken from a photo shoot February 8th of 1968. But let's look at the original one. Again, another shot from that same photo shoot. And I love this sleeve, but there's a lot of blank at the bottom here by my thumb. It's nice. It's a beautiful picture of the Beatles smiling and laughing and having a good time from that photo shoot. This was released in March 68, so it's very, very recent. Meaning this was the record was released in March and the photo was taken in February. So very, very recent, which was unusual, but beautiful. But again, in order to have a different record or a different alternative to my original, I wanted a different alternative sleeve as well. So both from the same photo shoot, both great pictures. This one fills up the sleeve a little bit better. The single for Get Back and Don't Let Me Down. Now, in the US, this came with the generic black The Beatles on Apple sleeve. No picture, you could see. So the fantasy people decided to get cute and did their own version. This might be my favorite picture sleeve ever, because obviously this was an outtake of the 69 Angus McBain photos that he did for what was to be the Get Back album. If you look, they're definitely outtakes. Look at John's, what he's wearing, and because normally he's wearing the pinstripe suit as George would be wearing in the 67 to 70 and all that stuff. So definitely a beautiful sleeve. I love this one. The same thing goes with the next one. The next one is Something and Come Together. This also was in the generic black sleeve. So they got creative, the fantasy people, and they made this, which looks like the back of the, obviously, the Abbey Road album. A beautiful sleeve. Something different, that's all. I may have come up with something a little different to show maybe the Beatles, maybe the cover of Abbey Road with the word something, but I think this is a really nice fitting sleeve. Just a little bit of trivia. In Canada, they made a mistake and they put Something as the B-side and Come Together as the A-side. And I'm going to show you that. It's not really for this video, but I'm going to show it to you anyway in case. In Canada, they used the Beatles on Apple on a white sleeve. Kind of cool, right? But as you can see, Come Together. Very weird that they did it like that. They could have put the Come Together at the bottom, but they chose Come Together. That's the A side, obviously, from the Apple. And then the B side, which I'll show you in a second, is Something which is incorrect. So these are worth some money. So if you see these on any auction sites, and Something is the B-side and it's a Canadian, I would buy it if it's a reasonable price. These are very hard to find lately. All right, just a little bit of trivia. Come Together, the era in Canada. I'm not sure if it was ever corrected. I'd have to go look again. I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. And the last two I have, because that's all I've done, and I'll explain why. I've explained why, actually, in the intro, but I'll say it again. Some of them were just not different enough for me to go through the expense of making more frames, but eventually I will, but I also need wall space, which I don't have. So the last one is the Yellow Submarine, not the last one, second to last, is the Yellow Submarine Eleanor Rigby sleeve. Beautiful sleeve. Now, you can see the original, again, gorgeously mimicked, with the same sepia tone, sort of. Oddly enough, this is from a New York City press conference on August 13th, 1965, this picture. So a little outdated by the time you got to Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby from Revolver. But the fantasy people, in hindsight, had plenty of time. And they chose this shot. Now this is a Robert Whitaker photo taken on May 19th, 1966. It's an outtake of the back cover from Revolver, obviously, which is the album these songs are on. So it's totally appropriate. Also, it's part of the Ed Sullivan intro when they showed Paperback Writer and Rain, when Ringo was talking about the washing and the cooking and everybody was busy. And I like this a lot. Very, very, very appropriate. So the last one that I have, and I'll be making more, is For She Loves You. All right. This was actually released, as you all know, on Swan. I'm not teaching you anything different. We're all Beatles fans, so we know. But it was released on the Swan label. The original is right here. Again, beautifully mimicked. I love this sleeve as well. This picture was taken by Dejo Hoffman again in 1963 spring at his Water Street studio, the same as the classic picture we started off with, For I Want to Hold Your Hand. This adorned the back of the Meet the Beatles album in the United States. Classic picture, amazing picture, I love it. But I wanted to get something different in terms of labels, because we had capitals and we had a couple of, obviously, apples. But I wanted something different, so I will be making Tolly or Tolly, however you pronounce it, at some point. But again, this photo, beautifully done by the fantasy people, is once again another from the Dejo Hoffman photo shoot in early spring of '63 at the Water Street studio. Nothing majorly different. Both of them are equally nice. I kind of like the original release one better, but this is still super. All laughing, smiling, so young they were. And just something different because it's on the Swan label, which also looks kind of cool with the black and the gold frames. So there you have it. I mean, I'm going to continue to do these frames, and I'm going to obviously need more wall space, or either that or my wife's going to divorce me if I try to put them anywhere else other than in the basement. But I will be getting some more of these and recording another video to show you more. If anybody wants to know, as I said in the intro, if anybody wants to know where I've gotten the supplies, I will definitely let you know in comments. I'll add links if you want, so you can do it yourself. These usually, depending on how much, as I said, can cost $25 to $40 depending on the record. I usually like to get very clean labels, as I said. So, but that's my fantasy versus original sleeves, my do-it-yourself project. I hope you really enjoyed it, and we will talk to you again soon. If you really enjoyed this, though, please push the subscribe button, because I'll be doing a lot more videos of this type. Take care.